Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the moment of truth.
Flashback. We are still carrying the weight of defund the police around.
Come on.
Now, by the way, almost no member of Congress said that.
It was a Republican talking point that you guys let them run with at you.
And so we're just the passive victims of that fact? Or can we stand up and say defunding the police is a bad idea that is opposed most intensely by African Americans?
A few moments later.
So let's talk about, you mentioned it a few seconds ago, that you passed a budget in the House. Among the things that are in that budget is the way ICE and Homeland Security are going to be funded moving forward. The two big things that were talked about in this week were how that was going to be funded and also if the Affordable Care Act subsidies were going to be extended. What's your take on where all of this has landed?
Yeah, Mike, and I was very proud to vote no on additional resources for ICE. It is time to completely rethink the way we are doing immigration enforcement here, because babies getting sent to the ER because flashbang grenades get thrown into cars or women being murdered by agents needlessly is not what we should be doing. So yes, the budget ultimately passed, but without a lot of Democratic support, which I'm very proud of the party for saying we're going to put some accountability into the way we're doing immigration enforcement.
Oh, what a difference a day makes, or rather what a difference two dead non-black people make. Jim Himes has gone from, we're still carrying the weight of defund the police, to, we're very proud of defunding law enforcement. Yeah, when it's not black people being killed, all of a sudden, it's not a problem at all. And to think that at this late date, you still got scumbags and shills running around here telling us that we should be voting for the Democrats because of all the things they've done for us. And because the Democrats, they're trying to actually help the black community. Yeah, this is the help that they're giving. Democrats, including Chuck Schumer, are now declaring they're going to vote against funding the Department of Homeland Security, which is one of the country's premier law enforcement agencies.
So let's talk about Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who says he's going to vote against the DHS spending bill, which passed the House this week. You say you need to crush ICE's budget. Is that the best way to do it? Is that the only tool congressional Democrats have at this point?
Yes, and I voted in Washington, D.C. last week to crush ICE's budget.
The government appears to be heading, though, for a partial shutdown by the end of the week as a growing number of Senate Democrats say they will oppose legislation that includes funding for the Department of Homeland Security. Joining us now, Democratic Senator Angela Alsobrooks of Maryland. She's also a former prosecutor and says she's voting no on the DHS funding bill. Good to have you on the show. Do want to get to your legal expertise on some of these issues in just a moment. But first, voting no on this bill, what does it do necessarily? Doesn't DHS, isn't it awash in cash for quite some time right now?
Oh, you're absolutely right. It is. It is the case that these Republicans have already superfunded DHS at a tune of $75 billion. So no, not another penny for this murderous organization to move forward.
And look at the language. They want to crush ICE's budget. Oh, that is actually very aggressive against law enforcement, sure to send a chill down the spine, if they have one, of everything with a badge in the United States. Oh, how could they do this? You know, the investigations into the deaths of these two white people hasn't even been concluded yet. To say nothing of any sort of charges being brought or any sort of trial, it is way too early for them to be talking like this, especially as a former prosecutor. This Senator Alsobrooks, she's supposed to know that. Well, at least that's the way they talk whenever black people are killed. It's like, well, we can't really say anything until we have the investigation over with. You know, we gotta wait till all the facts come out. But in this case, they're already calling ICE a murderous organization. They're calling ICE a murderous organization because of these two white people who were killed. A murderous organization, even though the investigation by DHS hasn't even been concluded. And yet here they are ready to jump out a window. They want to be the very first to say, oh, these guys are murderers. They're just murderous. And we got to crush ICE. We got to defund these scumbags. We're not putting up with this. They all want to be the first now to say, I voted against funding for this law enforcement agency. So now we're seeing Democrats like Jim Himes put to the test. We're seeing now whether or not he meant what he said. And we're seeing that he ran away from what he said so fast, and he's not even making a pretense about it. This proves that when that bastard was saying we're still carrying the weight of defund the police, he knew that he was lying through his horse teeth. What this was about is the same thing it's always been about. Whenever black people make demands, oh, there's going to be an iron wall against that. And on a side note, Jim Clyburn whining about Jamie Harrison not getting elected. Jamie Harrison, you'll recall, was Jim Clyburn's hand-picked boy, and he was lousy as a candidate. That moron couldn't get elected dog catcher if he lived in Catville. And after the 2020 election, you'll recall Jamie Harrison was made the DNC chairman. And how did Jim Clyburn's pathetic little protege work out? Democrats got rolled in the 2022 midterms, and they got blown out in the 2024 election. So that's the guy who Jim Clyburn was so upset about that he didn't get elected to office. That's the guy who Jim Clyburn wanted us to think was so capable. Oh yeah, the reason that he lost the election was because of defund the police. These guys lie through their teeth about everything. Between his senility and his laziness, Jim Clyburn needs to take a seat and a nap. But I'm reminding you of this because memory holding things is a key way that the white media tries to conjure magic. They try to erase people's memories by just not mentioning things anymore. We're seeing a real-time example of exactly how there's a racially biased program at work where both parties are concerned. These Democrats know the real problem is them, but they made the decision that they were going to make us the scapegoats whenever their failures led to them getting beaten at the polls. And I don't care if they want to whine about us, but I do care that they are allowed to advocate for the very policies that they spent years lying and denying about, and they just get away with it. So we've gone from defund the police as political suicide to Democratic senators and congressmen saying that they're going to be voting against funding the Department of Homeland Security. And Mika the Bigot Brzezinski didn't bat an eyelash at that one. She just gave a murmur of assent. No talk about how isn't this politically unpopular, or about how the black community isn't objecting to ICE. Shouldn't Jim Himes have been saying that? This would be a good time to remind that scumbag about that. Well, you don't see the black community complaining about ICE. I mean, why? The black community, they support ICE's activities. You don't see them protesting, do you? And also, there's no talk from Democrats about how the issue is training or reforms. Nobody's sitting there saying any of that garbage. Shouldn't the Democrats be trying to reform ICE instead of trying to abolish it? After all, that's what they told us with every law enforcement agency gunning black people down in the streets. We can't defund them. We should focus on training. The issue is training, you see. It's training. Biden didn't defund the thugs in blue, the police. He instead illegally diverted untold millions of dollars in COVID money to the cops, and he didn't require them to make any sort of changes before they got the money either. Keep in mind, this is the exact same rationale that Senate Democrats like Chuck Schumer are making regarding ICE. They're trying to use Congress's power of the purse as a way to compel this law enforcement agency to change what they're doing. So when law enforcement spends year after year murdering black people, unarmed black people in the streets all over the country, the Democrats pull out all the stops to fund the bastards and make excuses for them. But when just 2 white people are killed when they were interfering with a legal law enforcement immigration operation, then we need to shut down the agency responsible? Oh, no reformation here. These guys can't be reformed. We have to abolish them. This is not a training issue here. This comes straight from the top. People have to be held accountable. I mean, just look at how shameless the Democrats are being about this. They suddenly figure out how to advocate for something as long as it's not black people who they have to advocate for. And they are just so upset that the ICE goons are acting like anonymous randos. Yeah, no different than the police. The time to be calling out armed white men in the streets who call themselves acting like police even though they're not, that was when Kyle Rittenhouse was killing people. That was the time to call it out. And you had the police in Kenosha. They were giving him a thumbs up and an attaboy. They knew exactly what that scumbag had done. But the Democrats, they weren't terribly bothered by that. No talk about, hey, if a police agency is acting like this, we need to make sure that whatever federal funds that these guys are getting is put on hold. No, they weren't doing that. You had Jim Himes, Jim Clyburn, and all the rest of them saying, defund the police, that's political poison, we can't do that. The enemy understands the rules of racism. And there's a number of rules in place for the dominant society, too. White deaths can and are overlooked depending on how and why they're killed. These people died protesting the removal of illegal aliens. And look at how the Democrats and even some Republicans are reacting to that. Oh, we can't allow this to stand. And this is the reason why the black community is not getting involved. There's no need. When the people who are being attacked aren't black, then the white media sounds the alarms, the politicians will treat it as a public safety issue, people treat these deaths as if something bad had happened. And that's the reason why we're not getting involved. If black lives are not going to be treated with equal weight to everybody else, and they're not, then what the hell will we look like getting out there putting on the cape for anyone? Any black person who doesn't understand this at this late date is certified stupid. And while the Democrats are trying to make it seem as if there's some sort of groundswell going on, this is a tempest in a teapot. It's a PR issue which the orange man is going to deal with and move on to the next scandal. But you know who can't move on? The failed black misleadership class. The same people who have been successfully leading the black community around by the nose. These individuals are MIA right now. That's because they know that all of that black support that they thought that they were going to be having, that they could always count on, it ain't there. And they know why. Nobody's even bothered to ask where Messy Jesse is at. How about where Al Sharpton's hiding in the sound stages of MS Now? How about the clowns from these phony so-called black organizations? Where are they at? These sock puppets for white power were always controlled opposition, but without us, they're nothing. During the BLM protest, you had a bunch of tethers and foreign flags and other weirdos who were trying to use the media attention that the protests were getting to promote literally every other issue under the sun, from trans issues to, of course, immigration. And that was because we had a bunch of tethers who infiltrated the community and who hang around us, always trying to mislead us into backing what's important to them. They were going hard in the paint to say that America needs to give amnesty to all the illegal aliens now. And it was the black media who called these people out. We knew what the game was. These people were straight up ops. You have these silly Negroes at these BLM protests who were ready to jump out a window and couldn't wait to act a fool for immigrants. And that was because they were illegal aliens themselves. You know, people like Nicki Minaj. They were brought to the U.S. illegally, and their family and their friends are also illegal aliens too. And that's the reason why, as far as they were concerned, oh, these dead black people in the streets, that doesn't matter. What matters is making sure we don't get deported. What we see in Minnesota with the Somalians is only a microcosm of a far larger problem. This is why people like Congressman Horsford was declaring publicly that he was an immigrant first and only. And that's a major part of why trash like Jim Himes feel like they can go ahead and do this fork-tongued lying in front of the world, in front of our faces, because they know that there's nobody in Congress who's actually going to call them out on it. There's nobody who has the moral courage or the intellectual honesty to do so, not on our behalf, certainly. What's called for here is for the black grassroots to start demanding lineage litmus testing. That's what's called for. Start bringing it up publicly. We have to stop being bashful about demanding to know this and to have it declared publicly. When we see these off-code Negroes running around, we have to get in people's faces and ask where their folks are from. Now, for some of you, that might make you a little bit uncomfortable, but you need to get over that. Demanding that the police be punished wasn't normal until we made it normal. Demanding reparations wasn't normalized until we made it normal. Demanding clarity on this issue is not something that's going to be encouraged by the dominant society, because the obscurity serves the dominant society. And no, this is not going to be a pleasant thing, because what the tethers are doing to us is not pleasant at all. We have to make the block hot for these guys, put them on the spot, tell people that it is not okay to allow folks who made it their culture to undermine and attack us to be able to hide amongst us, and then we're supposed to be acting like we're all on the same side? We need to draw a line between those who are B1 and make sure we know who's on our side and who's not. We need to bring the sunlight to this conversation. The tethers are everywhere because they've had 50 plus years and untold billions of dollars in government money acquired legally or illegally and spread themselves around. You think I don't live in LA or New York or one of those big major cities, so they can't be here? That's what you think. And then if you ask about who's on your city council, you realize they didn't get there because they came from the neighborhood. They got there because they worked at a university, or some company paid to bring them to town. These out-of-towners who suddenly have lots of money, usually from white sources, and they've got white society support to call themselves being our leaders. That's how they declare themselves. They're our leaders, and they always got lots of white media support, and they're running for office to be our representatives, and in so many cases, we don't even know who the hell these people are. We just take people at face value, we don't ask questions, and that's how this happened. And your pork chop preachers and political pimps, they've been in on it. Most of them are shills and tools, and they've known all about it. But their job was to keep us distracted, keep us pacified. And that may have worked for a while, but it's not working anymore. That's why you had Don Lemonade doing that attention-whoring stunt in Minneapolis, trying to force himself into the news cycle. Those clowns he had with him, they don't have any influence. They've got absolutely no force behind them. They have no base behind them. They were just a bunch of randos off the street. Without the black grassroots, white power's flunkies have to do their own dirty work themselves. And that's not effective. And speaking of not effective, we got to make sure that when people sit here and lie and claim, oh, well, the reason that we can't do defund the police is because it loses us elections, it's time for people to be held accountable for the lies that they tell. So this is just the latest in an avalanche of examples of precisely why it is that the black grassroots is sitting this mess out. These people are making it blatant and in our faces that whatever they say to us is going to be exactly the opposite for everyone else. And that being the case, who the hell is going to be voting for this? Not me. And I don't think you're going to be voting for it either. This is why we put ourselves first, and we're not sitting here trying to have any sort of alliances or otherwise try to call ourselves protecting some politician. There's absolutely no reason for the black grassroots to be sticking its neck out for the dominant society because they're the dominant society. Whenever these guys so much as stub their toe, there's going to be all kinds of people who come running breathless with anticipation. Oh, how can we help you? They're not doing anything to try to find any dirt under the fingernails of Renee Good or Alex Preddy, and that right there tells you everything you need to know. They're not trying to dirty up the victims, and they're not bringing ICE on and just compassionately and patiently waiting as they explain, well, this is the reason why we had to gun that woman down in her own car, and this is the reason why we shot that guy to death in the street. They're not doing that, and they're not bringing on anybody else from law enforcement to explain, well, it's a training issue, it's a training issue. Oh no, they don't want to hear about training now. They don't want to hear about training, and they don't want to hear about reform. And you know what? I don't want to hear about that either. Not for the police, and not for the Jim Himes or the Jim Clyburns or the rest of the trash in the white media either. This morning's briefing is to make sure that you keep your eye on the ball, because what's happening right now is there's already being a response, and a robust one, to the killing of these two white people. For all those shills out there, all those morons who are wetting their pants thinking, this is the start of Nazi America, well, you can go ahead and stop crapping your diapers now. There's still plenty of time before the midterms. As usual, the people who actually are the victims of all of the police killings, the people who actually are being targeted illegally, they're the ones being ignored. You don't have anybody out there trying to hold up government funding for police agencies until changes are enacted. Nobody in front of the cameras frothing at the mouth and saying there won't be any more funding for this or that police or sheriff's department until they do what we say. And as long as that's the case, the political posture we're going to take will be a seated one. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Andrew Lewis, Bo McLean, Rebellious Zoe, Cedric Etheridge, and Esfeo Dingaswayo. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.